crying about my connection. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is one of your hosts of the Fajr Club podcast, Nafis Abu Zaid, and I'm here with my other co-host.
This is your brother Akil Ingram.
And this is your brother Abdul Haq Baker.
Now, and we are back with another episode by the grace of Allah Jalla wa Ala, which is pretty much on the tail of the last episode, which is episode 7. We talk about bridging the gap between the elder and the youth. And now we are on the Perils in episode 8, the Perils of Parenting, lessons to be learned, or lessons learned and to be learned. In this particular segment, we're going to delve into some of the different challenges that the parents as well as the children faces in regards to working together, in regards to how it actually, because this is an insight or reflection of how society is. What goes on in the home prepares the child, for facing society, And we'll let the brothers go in, inshallah ta'ala.
Go ahead, brother Akil.
Faddal, your floor.
Jazakallah khair. Continuing from last week, I remember something quite profound, but sadly more familiar today amongst some of our communities. And that was when Brother Nafis mentioned son saying to his father, next time I see you, you better be strapped. Okay. And that is an unfortunate reality we are seeing, but in particular communities, I would proffer. We as convert communities, African American, African Caribbean, Afropean, however we term ourselves in the West, one of the things that we found in our backgrounds as we and our upbringing from our families were a lot of disconnect in some areas, not all, because there's some very tight, close-knit families. Many have grown up in the latter, but many have grown up in the former. Now, for example, the group, my posse, the gang as they would term today, all of my friends who I was growing up with, we were all from single parent families, either through death or through divorce. I think I mentioned this to you beforehand. But then what dynamics does that throw up as it comes to parenting, raising children? And I'm saying whether it's a single parent family or both parents are there, what we see often is an estrangement between the children, and the parent. And in many cases, I'm talking about a UK perspective now, and you would have to speak to me about the American perspective. You'll see dissonance and conflict between sons and their fathers as they are growing, as we are growing. Okay. Some of us may be experiencing that even now. And the sort of conflict that arises often borders on the son or sons thinking that they have a right or a space to confront their parents physically. Whereas with ourselves, our generation, this was unthinkable. This was unspeakable. So we need to ask ourselves, what is it that has caused that shift amongst the younger generations today? And also we have to look at a dynamic, as I said, culturally, because you don't see that as much in the Asian communities, the Arab communities, the white communities. White communities, yes, to an extent, you will see that, but you will not see that as much, I would dare say, I would proffer, amongst our communities. And we have to question why. Now, some would say there's an inherited trauma from slavery. Okay. There may be legitimacy to that. I believe there is to some extent, but there are other associated factors as well. And I think it's important that we actually look at that. There's also, and you can speak to this better than I can, but I've looked at it, the nihilistic behavior amongst us, and also the denigration of women on the one hand, with the gangster rap and the misogyny that's there pre-Islam I'm talking about. Does that transfer, but within a cloak of religion, using now, instead of gangster lyrics and everything like that to denigrate the place of women, we use authentic narrations that have a context, but we're using them in a context that doesn't fit where we are, and we're denigrating or marginalizing women again. That's a question that I'm actually asking, because I've seen that transfer where the only position of the woman is a subjugated woman, a silenced woman, and any woman with a voice, any woman academically, any woman intelligently, any businesswoman is castigated or frowned upon.
Mhm.
So my thing is, has there been a transfer from our jahiliyyah into the deen, subconsciously or otherwise? Are our children picking up from what they are listening to and seeing elements of our behavior? And therefore, as they're growing, challenging that whole infrastructure of traditional family, even modern 20th, 21st century family. And as we said last week, they're also attached to an altogether different reality with social media and their peers being their family, whereas their parents are diminished in their eyes. A lot I've said there because this is a big
You said a lot.
subject.
You said a lot. You said a lot, and I have a few thoughts to follow up with. And the first thought actually is a quotation that I'm gonna paraphrase it and I'm gonna adjust it a little bit. And it goes something to the effect that difficult, hard times bring about strong people, and then strong people bring about good times and easier times, and then those good and easier times bring about weak people, and then weak people bring on those hard times, right?
Right.
So
I've heard that. Yes.
it becomes a cycle, right? In this type of a way. So to that point, I do believe that because as parents, we want our children to have better lives than we've had, for whatever that means to us, right? So we make things easier for them. We give them access to things that we didn't have. They have things younger than we had it. There's responsibility that is removed from them, right? And then all of that brings about a sense of entitlement, right? It's supposed to be here, right? I have value without putting in the work. I'm supposed to have access to, right? I'm supposed to be able to deal with you as an equal. It brings about that type of a thing. But along with this, when we find our relationships not surviving, right? When we find our marriages not surviving, then often that does bring about the broken family slash single parent type of households. And the men and the women that come up in those type of settings, there are certain effects that are just rather consistent, right? So the people that are coming up often, it's not necessarily the father who is carrying those children day to day, with regards to physically being with them, right? The father may be present, he may be guiding, he may be financing, but the day to day is often going to be the mother for whatever reason that choice was made.
Right.
Now, the children that are there, what they're witnessing, they're witnessing a strong, independent woman who is their primary caretaker, and that can become their vision of what the success model looks like. So now the daughter, in a way, is going to either emulate that or know that that is an option if she needs to go into that space later on in life,
Right.
right? And now the young man that's coming up in that particular space, now he may not have the example of the man in the home that he will need to know how to function properly in society, but there's still something innate within us to know that we're supposed to seek that out so that we know what it is and have some exposure to it. So then in the void of that being there, we often will seek that out in other places, right? And the other place often becomes some form of a group, right? Some form of a group. And in environments that we're from, those groups often may have negative connotations to them. So then this now takes the place of what the father could have been if the father was present inside of the holistic home, right? So I say that to say that often when we see certain types of gang behavior, certain types of criminal behavior, certain types of group think, even if it isn't criminalistic in nature, but certain types of group think, um, you can identify often that there may not have been a consistent father inside of the home. It does connect that way. There's something, and you guys can speak to it, but there's something when you have a father and a mother in the home and you're raised, and it is a fairly healthy environment where the people that come out of that environment, the children, they are able to be independent thinkers. They're able to be confident within themselves, and they're able to function in such a way that, okay, we want to add value to the world, and we want to give more than what we're taking from the world. We want to build, right? For some, there's something there that brings that about. And my last point to the many points that you're making here is that if we're speaking to music, um, I do think that we should acknowledge, of course, from the standpoint of our jurisprudence in our law, we're familiar with the music discussion inside of Islamic law, right? So I'm not necessarily speaking to that particular discussion. I'm speaking about music itself as an independent entity and how it is utilized culturally in our day to day.
Hmm.
Now, if we're speaking to music generally and we look to musicians, the average person today takes music as almost a spiritual exercise. And they take the musicians as though they are the ministers and the preachers of today, and how people will hang on to the lyrics, the emotion, and then utilize that to help them get through life or to get them in a particular mood in order to function in a particular space, right? Now,
Right.
that's in general. But if we're going to talk to the particulars of music, and um, let's say I'm not going to say hip hop. I'm going to say rap, right? And I'm going to distinguish between those two, right? For those that go back far enough. So if we're speaking to rap, or if you want to say gangster rap in particular, so before anything else, this is actually the war report from the streets. Is documentation of what is happening on the street level that is not being pushed honestly and clearly throughout media, right? Without the propaganda. But now within that, there are going to be certain influences, right? Because everyone is not looking at this as, okay, this is the news, this is what is happening, this is this person's experience. And because music is influential and people are taking it as spiritual, and they're looking to these particular musicians as though they're ministers and preachers seeking guidance from them. Now they start to enact what is inside of those lyrics instead of taking lesson from them in order to build out of those situations. So somewhere in there, I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. I think it's very well articulated, and I appreciate what you're saying. And before I hand it over to Brother Nafis, what you just said made me draw a parallel, which must have been drawn before. The way you just described the music, which is amazing, is it just threw me back to the magicians of Pharaoh and the position of the magicians with Pharaoh and the people, and when Pharaoh relied upon them to come to challenge Musa alayhi salam. So I think that's a modern day equivalent I would there offer. And just to let you know, when we sat with the shuyukh, we went for some professional development and religious development with the Jordanian mashayikh in the early noughties, and we asked this question about music because of the point that you're speaking to now. And because we saw the trend that was the go-to reference for everyone. So the killings that would be taking place in Brixton, the robberies that would be taking place, and Muslims robbing Rastafarians and drug dealers, and the conflict. So we then went and we said, look, this is coming from somewhere. Can we listen to that source to see what is taking place on the street? Not to get down. Okay, let's I hasten to add, not to get down. And so they said, if that's affecting what is happening in your community, in the wider community, to be cognizant of what is there is important. So, for example, when we were listening to, I went and listened to, others were talking about Capleton, okay, and they said that's why you're seeing an uprising. Capleton's a reggae singer. At that time, there were lyrics coming from him about the Muslims, because we saw an aggression coming towards us in South London, from some of the dreads. There were certain incidents, individuals got shot. I remember going to the hospital, but they were trying to rob a drug dealer and everything like this, and they felt the rustlers, the dreads are the ones we would go after and everything. And then there was a narrative coming up about that was very risky and dangerous towards our community. And when we listen to some of the lyrics from Capleton, it's like, this is how this is being interpreted by non-Muslims. So what you're saying here is very, very important. And again, I'm going to highlight here now. Some might say, how can Abdul say I'm not advocating listening to music, getting down and saying you heard this on the Fajr Club, because you didn't hear that. So make sure that we get the context accurate when referencing this particular episode. Brother Nafis, I throw the ball in your court, inshallah.
First, it was a whole lot to unpack, and it's good sometimes to digest stuff to make sure we bring one point to another point, just make it more organized. So it's a whole lot to go back to what you were saying. But what Akil did, I think he did a good job, fair job in answering the question that you posed, and also talking to some of the different factors that plays a key point in regards to the cultivation of our children, why that disconnect is there. And I think he brought a lot of them. One of them that I do remember him bringing is called overindulgence, right? Where we think that, and we actually create spoiled brats out of our children. I know this to be a guilty pleasure of myself, because I want my child to have everything that I didn't experience when I was coming up. So the things that now that we are in a different environment, a different culture where we have different things, we didn't have a lot of this technology that we have now, and they're coming up in the generation that my children are coming up. So I want them to have those things, and I want them to have more. But like Akil was saying, by being overindulgent and don't put them on a system as far as reward, right, and consequence, we just give them, and they believe that they are entitled. Right. So when they don't get it, they display a certain type of behavior. And if this is not monitored, it becomes where like they think that they're on an equal footing with the parent, and they speak to the parent. Like my 6-year-old speak to me and his mom like it's you be like, well, how can you understand? Like, why would you speak like that? But again, this is the society living. Another thing that I believe that a factor plays in when y'all was talking about music. Music isn't the sole reason why the culture is the way it is. So we're not going to put that on that. But it does play a key element, right? It does play a key element because it has the power of influence, all right? And that influence that is going on right now, like what we're seeing with the war report, I like how you phrase that, brother. But really, like, it is a scene of a war report, but it's more so what they call drill, all right? This drill culture, what we're seeing right now is gang members, right? Or people who aren't gang members who are now being affected by it, who are having a rivalry. And then that rivalry actually happens, someone get killed. So in order to taunt the other side, we make music. But the music is really murder music. I'm taunting my victim. I'm taunting his gang.
Right.
And on top of that, you're not going to do anything. Yeah, we pit him up. He's done. You understand? He was lacking. We got rid of him. And it becomes that type of music. So it pushed the other side to now retaliate.
Right.
Right? Because now they're talking about the person, the victim, in a bad way. We're smoking on the pack. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about the victim. We're defaming them. We're doing such and such. And our children who are in our homes from the Muslim communities, right? It's not a barrier because they're exposed to all of that as well. Like I have a 12-year-old son who is exposed to that all as well. All he got to do is look at YouTube. All he got to do is cut on the TV. All he got to do is do such and such. So these things are what is causing the authority of the parent to be put to the side and the cultivation of the children to be raised from other than the parents. You understand? And that's what I believe is going on right now. So when you ask that brother Abdul Baker, why is a disconnect there? I believe what we're fighting in this time is that the kids are being cultivated by other than the parents. And even though Respecting the parents is something that they hear. It's not something that they really understand. You know, when you look at those verses in the Quran, Allah Jalla wa'ala makes it specifically clear. Well, Allah will say that, you know, the verse, indeed we have enjoined upon man, Allah insan, right, to be
Right.
dutiful to his parents, towards parents. And then Allah describes something, right, that's very detailed about the hardship that the mother go to for childbirth.
Yeah.
It's a near-death experience, right? And on that magnitude of the mother, right? And this is why you see the emphasis placed on the mother. The child don't know this, that the mother went through all this painstakingly, rigorously to bring you about in this world, right? If the father is there, right? The father as well, being the provider, being the discipliner, being the educator, being the person who guides. And then, as Akil mentioned, that infrastructure, something about the mom and the father being in the same home, that leads to a healthy cultivation for that child to even see it or to live in that environment, right? Because that's the infrastructure: a man and a woman, a husband, right, and a wife, a father and a mother. But we come from broken homes. Those broken homes lead to us being raised by other than our parents. I'll stop there. I didn't want to go too far.
I think I'll jump in and then before handing back over to yourselves and Akil, first I want to come to the point. It's necessary, Brother Nafis, you said a lot was put in there because of the levels that we're speaking at and what we're addressing. It will be very basic and binary if we were to hold on to one point. As you've just responded and shown yourself, it's multifaceted, it's multi-layered. You cannot mention one without it being intertwined with the other. And both of you have articulated so well. Jazakumullah khair. So I throw that back at you, Brother Nafis, because you articulated the multifarious levels very, very well. But on the point you're speaking to, yeah, in the UK, drill music, what you're speaking about, in the UK, it started with grime. Okay, and my organization, Street Strategy to Reach, Empower, and Educate Teenagers, we have a deconstruct program, and where we go and look if it's extremist material. We, as long as the brothers qualified and conversant and dean, would look and break down minute by minute, seconds by seconds, what the narrative is, and counter it with dean and context. But we also did that with some of the grime music that was there, because we had some of the music going out. And then the next day, a 12, 13-year-old killed on the doorstep of his school. Killings in South London, where I'm from, you'll see that. I think you know Brixton, the Lambeth area, Peckham. We call it Pecknam. We've got places named after Baghdad. Why? Because of the level of violence and no-go areas for some of the police. And this was based on the music for exactly the reasons that you're speaking about, Brother Nafis. Exactly what was happening in the US was happening in the UK. That rivalry, and then those who were on the outskirts. And the sad and frightening thing was some of the main propaganda or protagonists were Muslims. Muslims were feared. You can Google things of the Muslim boys and other gangs. I mentioned to you one of the individuals who came to the dean, his brother, because he did not become Muslim. There were another group of Muslims who went and shot him point blank in his head 5 to 10 times because he wouldn't take Shahada. So the Muslim gang, yes, because he won't take Shahada. So the Muslim gangs and the Muslim individuals became the most feared in South London, and to an extent still are, because of their ruthlessness, and they don't fear anyone but Allah. Even though they've got a distorted belief, they won't touch the Muslims, but they will go after the non-Muslims. Okay, in that instance. So that level of disconnect, that's a very powerful intoxicant, if you like, to be with such a group. When you look at the family and the mum and dad, the mum and dad may not be from the backgrounds we came. They could have been nice, law-abiding, quiet, going to church before they converted to Islam and everything like that. Nothing robust or to admire, because today the criteria of admiration is he was gangster, he did this, he did time. That's what the role model is for a lot of the youth, even our children who are growing up and thinking, I want to be gangster. You know, when we see our children, even as I said, America, individuals who are American in Saudi Arabia, never been back to the States themselves, but they emulate the gangster persona because, yeah, this is what we like. If it was just a nice, law-abiding, tracksuit wearing, thobe wearing individual. No, that's boring. It doesn't resonate. No one respects that. But if you come from our backgrounds, then it would be like, yeah, my dad was such and such. He's got swag. I want to be like him. That's the difficulty. And that pull is so potent. And that's one of the reasons why parenting is as diluted as it is now.
Just to interject real quick, just to add what you're just saying, it's true over here. Like they have a crazy song out right now. She felt in love with a shooter, right? And the kids is like pretty much singing. So a friend of mine was telling me that he had to, stop his son from actually playing the song. But you know what I'm saying, because the shooter is on the low end toilet pole, but that's the song. So the media does play a responsibility in this because a lot of the shows that they put forth is all about this street gangster type of culture. The gangs, even though we know that drill originated pretty much from Chicago, right? And now we're seeing that it has took on a major effect. It is spread all across. So a person, right, ain't worrying about whether it's a bag. It's different in different times. When people come up, they was worrying about hustling to get out of the situation they were in. So they worried about making money, right? So you were trying to emulate the man who was making money more so the man who was the shooter. Now in the time that we live in, your reputation is all based about how many bodies you got. As one of the poets, I like to call them poets, as one of the poets said in his line, he says that we don't go off names, we go off murders, right? And it's just to speak to what you were saying earlier, what the scholars were saying. Me, for people who don't know, it's not that I'm advocating like you're saying, or Fajr Club advocating that you listen to music. But if you're going to be in the arena of da'wah, and you want to connect with people, you're going to have to know what's going on.
Right.
For me, I try to stay up. This is why I have social media. I try to stay up what's going on. And I'm not trying to be oblivious or act like I'm blind or colorblind that, the Muslims, especially the youth, are into music, right? So I need to be on to what's going on. I got a son, right? So if he's listening to this artist, I need to know what that artist is saying. Right. I need to know, some of the terminology they're using because, like you said, it's a power tool that make it influential for them to actually follow, right? And it's a battle, man. It's a battle because at one time we have the ayat, we have the hadith, you know what I'm saying? And we're trying to follow them as parents. And then our children on this side, it's like they're trying to go off with the whims of what society is telling them.
Right.
I hear you, Pop, you know what I'm saying? I hear you, Mom, but this is what's going on. You know what I mean? Because their friend or their homie, you know what I'm saying? He's doing this or this is doing that. And I think that we do have a big challenge in front of us. And I'm going to mention it later on if I get a chance. Some of the remedies that I think or the solutions that we can do to start helping to bring that level back up for the parenting. Inshallah. Yeah.
All right. So what I'm hearing and what both of you are saying is that there is a cool factor that we're not necessarily acknowledging. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So from a psychological standpoint, often when a child is much younger, we see the child and the child may emulate the parents or do some of the things the parents do or be closer to the parents and things of this nature. And this has a lot to do with the development of self-identity. When a child is much younger, the child's method of identifying the self and valuing the self is based on the world that the child is in, which is often the immediate home of the child. Even if the child is going out to school and elementary school or whatever have you, psychologically the basis of self-identity is within the home. But as a child enters into the adolescent years, and I say this understanding and stating that psychologists have recently extended adolescence to 23 now, right? Meaning mentally, right?
Right.
It's 23 and it's no longer 18 the way it used to be. But in the adolescent years, there's a shift where the individual is still seeking self-identity, but now they're comparing their self to the outside world. And they want to identify and learn who they are by experiencing the outside world, right? And this is why it's not necessarily unfamiliar for a pre-adolescent into an adolescent child to now have quote unquote role models, right? And look to icons and things of this nature. This is them looking outside of the home, comparing themselves to what is outside so that they can become familiar and comfortable with who they are as a person, right?
Mm.
It's an attempt to find the self. And within this, there is always a cool culture. So they're inclined to these things because it's cool, right? It's what's happening now, right? It's what everyone is into, and I want to be a part of that. So I guess I'm saying all this really to pose a question. If it is the fact that there is a cool factor that we're not necessarily acknowledging because we're so textual, right, in literal at times, or we're just more developed down the line than they may be at this point in time. We're not thinking that way anymore, even though we used to, right? um do we need to make Islam cool to our children? Is that what it is, right? Do we need to make it cool to be spiritual, cool to be religious, so that now when they're functioning in society, they don't feel lesser than, rather they will feel equal or superior to, because they're comfortable in their self identity as Muslims. So that's my question. What do you think?
I will,
Can I answer that if that's because this is interesting. There's an interest. It's a fascinating question, but the answer's already there.
Hmm.
It's already cool to be Muslim because we see the influence of Islam in the wider popular culture. You've got Busta Rhymes and many others who've taken Shahada and declared their Islam and speak about Islam. In the UK in particular as well, and I know in Philly, New Jersey, other places as well in America, you can see that non-Muslims are emulating Muslim attire. Okay, so much so many years ago now, I remember some individuals came to me and said, we thought we saw Muslims in a nightclub, one of the key nightclubs in the Tabernacle in Brixton, and they were wearing thobes and getting down. So when people went to them to say, "Oh, you're Muslim," is that no, we just loved the attire. We had non-Muslims coming into our book and clothes shops in Brixton, buying the attire, and would say, "Why are you doing this?" Is it because we want to look Muslim? So it already is cool to be Muslim, and that started amongst our generations. If you remember, when we first came to the Deen, and many started looking at us, the women, the men, look at these guys. It's cool. What's happened though? There's been a transfer or emerging of two diametrically opposed cultures and way of life, with the gangster rap and this type of music and Islam. They've merged. They've actually merged, and it's like putting oil in water. They don't mix. But our youth don't see that. They're doing their best to say, well, okay, this hybridization, this concoction is something we're comfortable with. This is our identity. They're not only self-identifying, looking at parents, looking at peers, they're creating identities now, which the wider societies are embracing. And that leads me to a question now. So I hope I've answered that. The Islamic, the Muslim cool is there. It's been there since the 90s. It got stronger in the noughties. It's still there now in 2022. Okay, it's still there very much. Even where I'm living here now, the non-Muslims look, not only are they becoming Muslims, but they're seeing that it's cool. Dubai, UAE is the most traveled destination in the world, one of them, because they're seeing how Islam leads. They're seeing how Islam, other cultures are embracing Islam, and that Islam is actually cool. You come to the expo here, you'll be seeing non-Muslims saying, this is amazing. And they know that the crown of this is Islam. But this poses another question within the Western context. Is there an element of social control that is above us as family units, as communities, that are allowing us to move, or our children particularly, to move in a particular direction? So they're saying, you can't go this way, you can't excel in this realm, you can't achieve in that realm. It's happened for years, but I'm talking about our children now. But this realm here, you can move in that particular direction. And the direction you're moving in is individualism, okay, away from your parents. So you can traverse what they're upon. You don't need to be confined to what they're trying to do with you traditionally. Whether you're Muslim, African American, African Caribbean. It doesn't matter. They've opened up an avenue for our children, and it's an element of social control that our children are grabbing onto via social media, their peers, and the music. Because think about it, in our day, we go to the late 80s, early 90s, gangster rap and everything that was happening with NWA was being shut down. FBI were writing letters. Police were shutting down joints and places that were pushing out this type of music. We were being arrested or being targeted because of the content of our lyrics. Now, you've got the big record companies, you've got the big advertising industries paying millions to hear more of that nihilism. So again, I asked this question: is it greater than our parenting structure, that there's a social control dynamic that we cannot compete with?
To answer that question, first, I believe you already answered it within the question. Brother, you already mentioned it with the individualism. There is an agenda. We're not going to disagree with that. There is an agenda that the society is pushing in regards to the media. There is an agenda that society is pushing as far as individualism and also the disconnect between the parents and the child. I believe that. Right? So there is. But when you say greater than, and far as in competition, I still believe, honestly, that Islam does provide the ultimate answer.
Yes.
And what it's going to take is for the parents or parent to man up, so to speak. What I mean by this, whether you're a woman or whether you're a male, is to start placing what we call a barrier between those influences within the culture, such as trying our best to educate our children on the most finest things they need, such as their belief. Our children have a vague understanding of belief. God, who he is. I get it from my 6-year-old all the time. The devil, such they have a vague belief of that. And in order for that to be coupled together, they need to see it being embodied. So this is where the role modelship plays with the parents, right? So the scholars, they have a saying, "In the da'wata bilisan al-hal ablagu min ad-da'wati bilisan al-maqal," right? That indeed the da'wah by way of action is more influential, right, than the da'wah by way of speech.
Right.
Right? And that's the same thing with a child. So if a child can see it being embodied, and this doesn't guarantee that the child is going to automatically follow it, but it's an environment that the parents have to create or facilitate for the child to be withdrawn from the influences of media, the agenda behind it, the disconnect, so that when you do that, you're giving them the tools that they need to fight off those influence, right? But what we have done, we became lackadaisical. I'm talking about myself now. We are so busy worrying about living our lives and doing what we are doing because we have to worry about the bills, right? We have to worry about different things. So we have to work hard. And then now we leave our children at the expense of someone else cultivating them. We lead them to the devices. We lead them to the TV. We lead them to such and such. So now the job that we supposed to have has been removed because they didn't pay it where, so we have to work crazy, right? And our children are now being raised by this information. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that becomes that problem. So we have to say no. If we got to work hard to pay our bills, we're going to work extra hard to make sure Islam is established within our home. We're going to work extra hard to make sure that connection with Allah is there. We're going to work extra hard, even though we got to put on more hours. That's what I believe some of the solutions should be, inshallah.
Akil, can I just jump in just before
Go for it.
I think what you've said is a beautiful, brother Nafis, because what you've just described there is that we've got to stop teaching our children the theoretical abstract, and we've got to start showing the actualization of what we're teaching. I want to throw a question out again, because I'm going to throw this one out, and brother Akil, maybe you can look at that. The challenge is now, if the parents are at the abstract stage of understanding, they haven't reached an actualization yet, they're at the abstract stage of understanding, then how are they going to actualize their children's learning if they themselves haven't done it themselves?
Well, absolutely. That's That's an impossible question. Right. So, but I'll attempt to answer your previous question and come into this one as well. So, to answer your first question, is there an overarching agenda and direction? Um, Absolutely, there is. The the question with that would be, how far do we want to go into that, right? Or do we want to speak to the Georgia Guidestones? Do we want to speak to the Bilderberg Group? Are we talking about Bohemian Grove? Are we talking about Planned Parenthood? Are we speaking about the industrial age, and at least in the American side, how the people's responsible for the industrial age, um, one group in particular, one family in particular, almost single-handedly um, readjusted the entire educational system toward their benefit, right? Um, do we want to go back to speak about the Jesuits? Do we want to speak to Freemasonry? So I'm totally the conspiracy guy. I'm the guy, right? We can go down in one of those tracks, but at the end of the day, I think what we are speaking to is capitalism.
Mm.
Really, that's really what we're up against, and we're living in unprecedented times. So
Mm.
we're living in a scenario where no Muslims before us had to ever interact or deal with this way before, right? We're in uncharted waters. We just are. So we have our outlook on life, and we have our lifestyle, and that's governed by the Sharia, by our legislation. However, we have not been in a scenario where we were not able to implement our legislation amongst our own people, in our own states, in our own societies, right? And then we're attempting to live our legislation, our lifestyle, our spirituality under another society, right? In another model, the likes of what has never existed before,
Right.
right? So we're up against capitalism, and then trying to make ourselves fit into that and be able to function within that. And I don't think that we're going to be able to get to where we're going if we ignore that reality, right? That we are living in it's capitalism, right? It's not socialism. It's not a theocracy. It's not Sharia law. It's capitalism. That's what it is.
Mm.
So because of that, the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we learn it, and the sooner we figure out how to begin to manipulate it and adjust it to tilt capitalism to our advantage, so that we can begin to adjust our households and our communities the way that we want them to be. um, I think that we are being unrealistic, and I think that we are cheating ourselves. In that, yes, we can, we should, we have to implement Islam inside of our homes the best that we can, but that doesn't negate the fact that environment also plays a very strong role, right, and has much influence. So what we have to do is we have to be able to create environments where what we are teaching inside of our home is being reinforced outside of our home in some controlled area, right? And I'm not talking about something that's outlandish here, right? Because we see, please speak to how things are in Britain, but we see in the Americas, we see the Jewish community, they do it, right?
Mm.
There's going to be a Jewish side to town. There's going to be a little Italy. There's going to be a Latino side of town, and they create a bubble for themselves, right? There'll be Indo-Pak areas, for example, or
Right.
Arab areas, for example, and they create this bubble for themselves where they can function, and their values are being emulated in the broader society, right? At least the broader society that they're living in their everyday life. So now when the children come out of the home, now they're seeing actualized what's being theorized inside of the house, and it becomes a reality for them, and they're able to adhere to that, and then live that life with confidence and also with value.
What you said there is so profound, because when we look at that, similar in the UK, for example, again, it puts us back in that direction. Have social control mechanisms steered our communities in a direction where all we are seeing is that we are entertainers via sports and music, and the undercurrent of that, which is now acceptable, is the violence that connects those and the family. Whereas what you've said about Little Italy, the Jewish communities, we have the Jewish community, we have that in the UK, and none of those areas are ghettoized. But when we look at our communities, we see that they are among the first to be ghettoized, and we see that our children who have not been raised in the ghetto or with the ghetto mentality of survival, because we're doing all the things you said, Nafis, we're going out and working, we're making sure our children have what we never had. We are enabling our children, which is a dangerous thing, especially some of the mothers who enable the children, the boys particularly. We are, our children are not having any boundaries or barriers with regards to how they connect with us as parents. They're seeing us as equals from age of 6 right the way up to the point of confrontation. So that taking place in our communities is a problem. And another problem, and Malcolm X spoke to this, is that everyone else can come into our communities, set up businesses, profit from the things they're selling in our communities, and significant aspects of those things are not beneficial, to do with health, to do with education, to do with psychological development. And then they take the dollar or the pound back to their communities. And we're not doing that within our own communities. And our children are seeing that. And what they do see, though, as you say in America, they see others on the corner with the best clothes, the nice cars, and they see them spending in the community, but nihilistically, and then getting out to the suburbs or wherever it may be, the same in the UK as well. And they want that because that's the escape route, even though they're not in the same scenario. Okay. So the ghetto mentality is not among our children, but they strive to emulate that ghetto mentality. So it comes back to what you're saying, Nafis, with regards to manning up and really actualizing what is happening. But let me say this, Nafis, it's really hard.
Okay, so real quick, just I want to touch on Akil's point. Yes, I feel you made a profound point. We don't live in a state or a country that is governed by the Sharia, so it's real difficult to try to maintain the Sharia, especially for it to be reinforced outside of the home in a non-Sharia compliant country or state. That's true. However, we do live with one factor, no matter where we at, whether it's a Sharia compliant or non-compliant, and that is ittaqullah haythuma kuntum. That party that still remains there, that we fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wheresoever we may be. And we don't need to be in a Sharia governed state for us to learn the tenets of our faith.
Right.
The first school starts with the home before you go to any other school outside. There aren't schools in our home. That's just the reality. Mm. And we aren't building that foundation, as you said, what the psychologists are saying now, as far as the adolescents with identity. We aren't building their identity with the belief which gives them perspective on how to look at life, because that first school isn't developing their home. All right, that's just one point. The other point to Brother Abdul Haq Baker, there are key solutions that we can look at, not just with the statement of Malcolm X in regards to economics within our community and how we allow outsiders come in to profit off of us and to go back and share and circulate that wealth that they just accumulated from us with their respective communities. But in reality, we have to look at two main factors. One, the masjid is a social, economic, right, spiritual center, is an infrastructure. Whatever you want to look at, it is an infrastructure. And this is why I feel that in the last 25 to 30 years, with the fighting, the bickering, and the different agendas that have been pushed on, don't take from this individual, don't do this, don't do that, has put a wedge, right, within our youth. Because most of the individuals who are in the Dawah arena now are having the same problems with their children.
Right.
Do you understand? Who are gravitating towards drill, who are gravitating towards criminology, who are gravitating towards the disconnect of with their parents, and not a practice of, because we have been so busy with going at each other's throats and trying to prove who's the better person, who has the more knowledge, who don't do ahlul bidah, but our family is suffering right there by us. So it allowed the agenda that's outside of us within the non-Islamic state, what they're pushing, to come right in and to take our children for right up under.
Absolutely.
It allowed that to happen because my sons say to me all the time, "You're still beefing with Germantown?" All they do is beef. Is this going on? What's this going on? And he's 12 years old. So to him, it's no different than the hip hop scene, right? So and so artist is beefing with so and so artist. Now that we're in the drill scene, those artists that really beefing, they're really beefing. They ain't on wax. It's off of wax. You know what I'm saying? But the still reality is there. We have to really take some responsibility for ourselves and realize that we have to take the role model, right? I want to give two solutions that make it help. One solution that Allah Jalla wa'ala tells us, and that is very imperative, and it should be constant for all of us, whether you got children or don't got children, but if you got children, you should do this, is dua. Dua need to be made constantly for ourselves and for our children, right? And we have many multiple narrations. I'm not going to go into all of them. We have narrations that tells us about dua. We have ayats that tell us about dua. The prophets, they made dua. As Ibrahim says, Habali what? Habali mina salihin. Make dua for his children or his offspring to be from those who are righteous. Right? So it's clear. Allah tells us a dua that we should make, right? رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا, right? Allah says, "Oh our Lord, make from our wives and our children those who are a delight or a comfort to our eyes, and to make us a imam for those, for the muttaqin," which role model plays a part in that as well. But you see that dua plays a tremendous part. Another thing is dua at the conception, not at the conception because you don't know when you conceive, but in intercourse, so that you protect the child from the shaitan, right? These things are insulation from Quran and Sunnah, right? And these things should not be disregarded because we have a society outside. Well, brother, that's textual. That's not practical. No, it's really practical. These are the things you need to protect your child, to protect yourself. Dua is one of those things that protect you. Another solution, and I think I mentioned it, another solution is the fact of being a role model, showing them that embodiment in home first and foremost. And I'm guilty because it seems as if since I've been practicing Islam, I have not had a complete for Islamic household. Many people don't even know that. They don't even know that just because you're Muslim doesn't mean your household is Muslim, right? Many people think that, I'm Muslim, so the household is Muslim. No, your home have to be geared off Quran and Sunnah. You know what I'm saying? Have to be governed on that. And that's not the case. So our children know that. Pop, you tripping. Now you want me to wear my pants around my ankle? Now you want me to pray? But Pop, you was just, be real. So when they see you phony, quote unquote, right? Why would they listen to you?
Exactly.
You can go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead, Sean.
So what I would say here is, and I know we're coming up on time, so I'll attempt to be as succinct as I can. We can give our children education, direction, love, protection. We can do all those things. One thing that we cannot give our children is iman. We can't give them faith. Even if a child is born into a Muslim household, that child still has to embrace Islam for his or herself. That still has to happen at some point. right? It's not a birthright. It doesn't happen that way, right? So in understanding this, we understand that the child at some point has to build their own independent relationship with Allah, and sometimes that comes the same way that it came to us, by way of some life challenge or some traumatic experience or some eye-opening, breathtaking experience that shifts you into a high level of your spirituality. Our children may have to go through this as well, at some point. But to your point, Nafis, the parent supplicating, making dua for the child, is one of the supplications that is responded to by Allah.
That's right.
And we should cherish that and honor that. Responded to by Allah, meaning that Allah may grant it to us in this life, or He may deflect it equal harm away, or He may store it for us until the day of resurrection. And my last point that I'll make, and in my rhetoric, is what our Lord mentions in Surah Al-Kahf, concerning the two young boys who Khidr and Musa had fortified the wall for them because of the treasure that was left, and the parents were bequeathing to the children after they had passed. They left something for their children, right, which we should take lesson from. But the what we learn from this, or what the Lord states about this, is kana abuhuma salihah, that their father was righteous. So we should understand that the righteousness of the parent, because the parent is righteous, Allah may extend blessing and mercy to the child that they otherwise would not have received if the parent was not righteous of self, right? And that being righteous is a true righteousness, meaning not necessarily just when you're out in public, but internally and spiritually, and when you're alone by yourself, right? Truly developing your piety and your devotion to Allah, right? And your servitude to Allah within yourself. This is something that does carry, and we see examples of that. For example, with Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Allah granting that to him throughout the remainder of his progeny, honoring him with prophethood from his children all the way until the last and final prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Now, I would say in conclusion, I think some beautiful examples there. We also have the example of Yaqub alayhi salam. And this is, and I have to point this to myself with my impatience as well with my children in despairing that what's happening with them. We see that with Yaqub, again, what Brother Nafisa says and what you've reinforced, Akil, the dua of Yaqub with regards to his children. And we saw what some of the brothers did to Yusuf alayhi salam. But Yaqub, in the end, we saw the end with regards to all of his children being returned to him. Where the dream of Yusuf alayhi salam, we see that on his deathbed in Surah Al-Baqarah, he asked his children, all of them, who will you worship after I'm gone? And they said, again, going back to Prophet Ibrahim, the God of your fathers, our fathers, Allah, basically. So we see that on Ibrahim's Yaqub's deathbed, and I pray that we all have that upon our deaths, Ameen, with regards to our children, them being upon Tawheed. So we have that particular example there to have hope and patience that if our children have gone out there, are going in that direction, that inshallah, they, like Yaqub's children, will come back. And we see that the progeny of Yaqub's children, Allah refers to them in the Quran, Al-Asbat, were righteous in that way. So these are weighty lessons of hope. But this hope is not just sitting there twiddling our thumbs. This hope is dua, which is the weapon of the believer. The dua is accepted for the child without doubt. That's the hadith that's there. And as you have said, Brother Nafis, we need to actualize the learning and teaching of our children. We need to actualize it. If we are at the abstract stage, then we need to be understanding that and learning from others who are not at that stage. And that's in line with the hadith, that we look at those who are above us, okay, that we look at those below us to be grateful for what we have, because that's an actualization. That's not theoretical. We don't look at those who are above us, because those are things to aspire to, be envious about. They're abstract. We can't reach those, but where we are is actual. And that's with regards to experience. So we need to look at ourselves, and we seldom do that. And when we look at ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, are our children mirroring us? And if they're not mirroring us, what do we want them to be taking from us?
No, alhamdulillah, man, you brothers brought some beautiful points. Like I said, all of this stuff, I was saying before we went live, all of this stuff we need more episodes because there's a lot of stuff to unpack, especially the thing that Akil brought up about capitalism. I think that we do need to educate our youth on our children on some point to be able and ourselves to educate ourselves with capitalism because that's the type of society we live in, so that we can find within the deen and the sunnah that we can use to combat that. That influence is actually there from that. I think that's and also when you were saying about the entertainers being like the entertainers being like the role models now for the children, that's true. That's honestly true. My 6-year-old know about King Von. So you understand? So it's like uh the concept there is that we do need to make sure they be able to focus, more so on the responsibility. I just want to mention this last point. I'm done. Um, think about this. Honestly, think about this. What is the purpose of having children? Do a lot of parents even actually think about that, right? And that verse I quoted earlier, Hassan al-Basri made a beautiful point, right? And the verse that I quoted from Surah Furqan about the dua, oh Allah, make our wives and our children to be the comforts of our eyes. He mentioned that the comfort of our eyes is not someone who is beautiful, handsome, or have this adornment. Because sort of, how we are raised, the children play with dolls. So we think of Barbie and Kent, and we think long as we shower the children, overindulge them, we put them on with all of these clothes, where they have expensive designer clothes, whatever. We are being good parents. This is a standard for us that we are a good parent, right? But that isn't the purpose of the child. Hassan al-Basri explains that that benefit that you want the child to have for you is that when you're gone, that child is going to pray on your behalf. Do you understand? When you're gone, that child is going to come and offer dua. He or she is going to pay your debts, right? He or she is going to make hajj if they can on your behalf. How many of our children will even go that far for any of us when we go? How many of them even know of this? Because we have to understand the responsibility that we have as a parent, and we have to understand that what is the role of having a child. And I think that these discussions parents need to have. If you're a newly parent, or even if you have multiple children, you need to really start asking yourself, what is the benefit of your child to you, and what is the benefit of you to your child, so that you can start putting things in its proper perspective, and you can prioritize and know what to actually give the child. You know what I mean? Giving the child the best of the dunya is not going to be the answer. That's not the answer, and that's what we have seen going on. That does not speak to your good or the validity of your good parenting, right? Your good parenting is going to be based on what you teach them and the connection, which you mentioned about Yaqub, right? What Ibrahim, Akil mentioned about Ibrahim, right? This is what it's going to be. Last and not least, what did Allah says about Prophet Isa and the Prophet Yahya? I had to mention this point. I didn't get a good chance, but what did he say about Yahya? Yahya said, "Wabarran," right? "Wabarran biwalidayhi, wa lam yakun jabbaran asiya." And it's funny to me because I'm thinking, like, why would Allah mention it? Why is it so important that the child shows this type of behavior towards the parent? He says he made me to be what? Dutiful towards my parent, and not to be one who was arrogant or disobedient. And then with Isa, when Isa spoke, he said the same thing. He says, "Wabarran biwalidati," right? "Walam yaj'alni jabbaran shaqiyya." And he made me to be dutiful towards my mother, and not make me to be someone who was arrogant or unblessed, right? Why is that important that the child understand that the rights of the parents is so monumental? That's just what I wanted to say, inshallah ta'ala. You guys can access certain. I'm with the intellectuals, brothers and sisters.
But
it's
you,
continue.
all intellects, mashallah. Jazakallah khair.
Nah. We'll continue, inshallah ta'ala, next week, hopefully. Like we said, this is the 8th episode. Next week is the 9th. When we get to 10, we're going to be at the first season completed, inshallah ta'ala, for the Fajr Club. All right. Hopefully in season 2, Brother Akil will reach out. I will reach out. Brother Duhak Baker will reach out, and we'll start getting some guests on here. All right, we'll start getting some guests on here. Start talking some more different stuff. Some of the things you guys mentioned, we'll try to bring up, inshallah ta'ala. What you guys think about that?
Absolutely.
No, okay.
Total agreement.
Thank you all for tuning in. There wasn't really no questions, so I didn't post it up. There was no questions, brothers and sisters. Brothers, it wasn't, so I didn't post it up. Inshallah ta'ala, thank you all for tuning in. This is your host, Nafis Abu Zaid, and I'm with my other co-host.
This is your brother Aqil Ingram.
And this is your brother Abdul Haq Baker.
Thank you for tuning in to the Fajr Club. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.